In this section, you're going to be building the base or the armature of your sculpture. The armature is kind of like the skeleton and muscle system if you think of it in relation to the human body. Things that you could use would be things like recyclables, wire, tinfoil, newspaper, tape, hot glue, or really anything that you can find around to work with. Start off by finding something that would work well as a nice base to build around. And then you'll start using your other materials to mold your sculpture. As you're working on this, really compact anything that you're using. You don't want anything to be super squishy. So as you're working, really tape down your newspaper or your tinfoil. A note on working with tinfoil: you don't want to squish it right away and make it super hard to work with. Use it loosely and mold it around your work fairly loosely first, and then once you have the shape you want, you can really start to squish it down so it's going to be the way you want it. Working back and forth between materials and tape, you're just going to continue to mold your sculpture. Know that these materials can be challenging to work with. Not so much that they're hard, but it's just you have to really pay attention to every single layer and every attachment to follow your original plan. The other thing to be mindful of is that as you're working, your plan will likely change some. The way you drew your plan on paper, you're not going to likely be able to sculpt it to look exactly the same. So just kind of know as you're working that it's okay for your plan to change. It's okay for your plan to evolve as you learn how to work with these different materials. As you're working, continue to evaluate your piece and don't be afraid to make changes. You can see here I decided that my sculpture was too tall compared to my original work. So I ended up taking apart the whole top, just ripping it open so I could remove some of the material inside and make it a little shorter so that it was more true to my original plan. In order to make little spheres to work with, I think the easiest material is newspaper and tape. You can attach things pretty well with wire. I would really like wire coat hangers because the wire is a little more stiff. Something to be mindful of though, when you cut that wire, it will have a fairly sharp edge. Make sure you're being careful and not running your fingers across that edge. I also really like securing things with a combination of tape and hot glue, but be mindful of that hot glue. It's another material that can injure you if you're not careful with it. Those glue guns do heat up fairly hot and the glue doesn't set right away, so you have to be careful of not putting your finger into that pile of wet glue. In order to attach things with wire, you can really sort of wiggle that wire down into the original form that you're trying to get it to attach to. You don't want it to just be sitting on the surface. You really want it to kind of bury down into it so that it's not going to shift around on you and you have a more stable base. Again, hot glue and tape is a great combination. Make sure your glue and tape are really well set before you start bending your wire around. Don't be afraid to use unusual ways to mold your materials. You don't just have to use your hands. You can use your table to roll your materials on to get them to the shape that you want them. Or maybe you have other things around that would help you get these things just the right way for your sculpture. As you're working, make sure that you're really securely attaching everything. You don't want any part of your sculpture to be hanging off or not quite fully attached.